The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
And welcome to Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. I am your host, JP John Paz, for the two-man power trip of wrestling. Joining me, as always, is the star of the show, the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion, the former NWA Florida Heavyweight Champion, and one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in pro wrestling, the man behind the NWO, the man behind the success of WCW, the Taskmaster, the Games Master, the devil himself, Mr. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how you doing today, sir?
Thank you, John. I'm doing well. Doing well. Big day
Yep.
for us, right? New
Yeah.
president. Yeah, things keep rolling on.
Yeah, we were just talking about before. The news is all over the place covering Trump gone and Biden in. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy day news-wise.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you that this country just forges on. You know what I mean? Like 14 days ago, we thought the end of the world was coming, and now we get up, have a coffee, and everything's okay. So hopefully we're on some kind of, everything calms down, we start working with one another again.
Yeah, for sure. And we were just also talking about WrestleMania. They announced 3 of them in a row for whatever reason. It's just, to me, was a little bit of overkill. The actual commercial itself, I thought was absolutely terrible. The way that it was produced, the way they did it, the corny names and all that other stuff. But what did you think about the WrestleMania announcement?
I thought it was, you're trying to, as we talked before, you aren't focusing. Your number one show is WrestleMania. That's what got you to the dance. That's when they had all the chips on the table. And if they didn't get blackjack, they were out of business. They hit blackjack. And it's been special. How does it be special when you're trying to make the site the star? Tampa, Dallas, Hollywood. And then you have a guy that I've admired from afar, John Cena, who's the last vestige of, one of the last vestiges of willing suspension of disbelief, have him as a half-ass comedian, and they're doing this tongue-in-cheek. They forgot what brought them to the dance. What brought them to the dance, let's go back in history, so we'll give somebody our friends history lessons. Do you know what got them to the dance, John, originally? What got them to wrestle the first WrestleMania?
The Rock and Wrestling connection with Hulk Hogan, right?
But the one thing that got them there was the Piper match with Hogan. What was it? The Brawl for it all? Or no?
The war to settle the score.
War to settle the score. Wasn't that in Long Island, your area?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it was in Nassau Coliseum. And I can remember to this day watching that MTV and Tina Turner. They showed it on the screen and she was introducing it. And when it came back, she said, I thought this was fake. They beat each other up.
Oh, yeah.
You're so far removed when Hunter got the wig on and Steph got the glasses on, and then you got, it's a spoof. It was like a Saturday Night Live spoof. If that's what you're going for, then say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be Saturday Night Live. Maybe it's not a bad idea. Maybe they've crossed the threshold. As Jimmy Cornette says, that you can never put the toothpaste back in the tube. Maybe they're so far past that. Let's go and say, we're going to do spoofs. We're going to do skits like Saturday Night Live does. We're not even going to present it. It's going to be a performance art. And we're not going to even use the word combat reality or combat sports entertainment or nothing. Just drop it as worldwide entertainment.
And it was actually at MSG, Madison Square Garden, New York City. So it was even bigger than Nassau. Bigger show.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
Yeah.
And you remember they, obviously went to WrestleMania. You have Mr. T teaming up with the Hulkster, which added another element, even more celebrity to it. But Orndorff and even Orton when he interfered and Piper, I mean, they beat the crap out of T. I mean, it wasn't like, it was some mammy-pammy stuff here. I mean, they stiffed the hell out of him.
Yeah, yeah. I worked with T, and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I still work with him a couple of times. I happen to, get along with him. He was a pretty nice guy, but I think when you're in the business and he came, I mean, I stiffed him. I mean, I hit him with Jimmy's megaphone and I didn't hold it back. I'm not proud to say it, but it was a different time, different era. And, you know, you thought about it differently. But not only did they have T, you know who was the referee on the outside of the ring was Ali. Do you
Yep.
remember that?
Yep.
And they had Billy Martin, they had Liberace, people that people today wouldn't even know. The June Taylor dancers. Didn't they have Pete Rose as the bell keeper?
Not that year.
Okay.
No, I know Liberace was there.
Billy Martin was the
Obviously,
bell keeper. That's what
Billy
it was.
Martin. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Billy Martin. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were selling their product and a little bit of the mystique of Madison Square Garden. But if you were buying it at a closed circuit, it didn't matter where it really came from. You were buying that match.
And do you remember who the referee was? The actual referee?
Was it Pat Patterson?
Yep. Oh, look at you. Great memory. Yeah, it was Pat.
Yeah, yeah.
He
So, I mean, what?
he probably booked it. He probably booked it too. So, he wanted to make sure everything went down the way he booked it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that he had a lot to do with that. Like you said, I mean, back in the day, one of the smartest guys, and Piper and I were pretty friendly. And Roddy, he made Roddy Piper this guy I'm going to mention. And I was around him for a short period of time. And he was one of the. I got to put him on the maybe number 6 or 7 of the smartest guys I ever met was Leo Garibaldi. Leo Garibaldi made Piper, in LA. And Leo used to referee. And if he had given a finish in the dressing room and he saw, we'll say the heel was supposed to go over, but he saw something in this brand new babyface, he changed the finish in the middle of the ring. So, I mean, I'm sure that's what Pat was there for, to make sure to help out T, maybe. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Tell him where to go.
For sure. Now, as far as today's episode of Taskmaster Talks, we're going to go back to 1998 when WCW was rockin' and a rollin', was the number one company in the world. Let's go to January 24th, to be exact, in 1998. WCW/NWO sold out from Trotwood, Ohio at the Hara Arena, the very famous Hara Arena. The attendance was about 5,500, the buy rate 1.02, which equates to 380,000 buys, which it's less than Starrcade and less than the next month of Super Bowl, but still, if you think about it, 380,000 buys, that is a damn good buy rate. And of course, the tagline "Hell hath no fury," and then obviously, like WCW NWO sold out. So, what do you kind of first think when you say, "Yeah, 5,500 people at the Hara Arena"? That's okay. No, Hara Arena is not a huge venue, but it's like okay, but 380,000 buys.
I mean, what do they do today in today's day and age?
We don't know because of the WWE network. You don't know, but whenever AEW runs a show, which is only 4 times a year, they do about 100,000 buys at top max, 100,000.
There was by this time, there was a wrestling fever going on in the country. And, you follow wrestling, John, you're a wrestling historian. You can tell. And it's almost like the stock market. We have these wrestling booms almost every 20 years. And I asked Barnett about it, and he gave me the greatest answer. He said, it pertains to today, too. Like we've talked about about Goldberg coming back and people give him flack, he's 54 years old, right? And I
Yep.
saw what Eric said, that You know, wrestling is generational, and people grow up in wrestling, then they leave it and they come back and they want to see the stars they remember. Well, I asked Barnett about it. Now, you got to realize Barnett was involved in 5 national televisions. The first one was the one out of Chicago. And I said to him, "Why did you leave for Australia?" He said, "Because we didn't make stars from 50 to 70 except a couple." He said, "How many times could they see Kowalski wrestle Yukon Eric or the Graham brothers against uh, Rocker and Perez?" It takes a shakeup, and now we have 2 companies. And Vince said, if you look at what we really did, John, we took the hard work that WWF at the time did to get guys over. And then when they kind of got, guys over, they kind of, getting a guy over is something, and the guy's got to get over on his own. But once you get there, you kind of back off. We just gave them another platform to work and revive them. And that's why I think the business boomed. And then along comes Stone Cold, and we have a real neck and neck, and there's people wearing T-shirts everywhere you go. It's like, John, big sports towns. Like you go in Boston, you walk downtown Boston. Every third person either has a Red Sox hat on, or a T-shirt, or this time of year a Brady jersey. It's sports town are generational, and because you grow up watching the products, and after a while you can even get away from it. And I don't know if you've ever gotten away from the sport you like, but I got away from baseball for a while because it was the same people, and you got to make stars. Does
Yep.
that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny because we haven't seen the wrestling boom. It's probably been 20 years now. We haven't seen the boom yet,
Right.
but hopefully it's happening. But it's funny. We had the 80s, 1980s boom, and then the 90s boom with WCW, really, and the Attitude Era. So we got kind of, I guess, got 2 bunched in one there. And we got lucky. But yeah, we haven't seen one in a long time. I think it's
Right.
long overdue.
Right. And here's the thing. I thought about this today, John. When I was a kid and I went to the matches, I've told you this before, I knew they weren't all on the level, but I believed in the Sheik, or I believed in Bruno. I mean, they were doing shitty high spots back then, you know what I mean? Where a heel gets tag match with one heel, Altamore and Albano. Altamore would get tied up in the ropes with his hands spread out, and they pick up the captain and use him as a battering ram. In another one, I don't know if you ever seen this on the YouTube, where the heels get thrown together, and the baby faces grab their legs and they're like rolling them. Have you ever
Yep.
seen that?
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, if you've been any kind of athlete, you know that's bullshit. But you go along with it. But you don't serve that up as the last 3 matches. You know what I mean? You get the people, you give them the circus, but the last 3, you give them the high wire act without the net. Then you give them some lions and tigers and bears, oh my, that are vicious. Then you have Gunther Gable Williams sticking his head in the lion's mouth to end the show. You give them that scariness where it maybe takes you that first act to get you scared or involved in it or willing suspension of disbelief. The second act, you hook me. In the third act, I'm standing up watching it, because my brother came to the matches with me one time when I was a fan, and he didn't like wrestling, and I watched him. He kind of laughed the first couple of matches. By the end of the night, he was standing and booing and cheering like he should have been. So I think I'm trying to surmise how to say this. I think we need to decide what our product is. Not me and you, but the people that run these companies need to surmise what their product is. And from what I see in the WWE, it is strictly Saturday Night Live light. So go ahead and do that, because I don't know how you go back. You're so far off the road, I don't know how you get back there. And the ones to me that have the best chance, have you got a chance to look at that SWE Fury?
Oh yeah.
You know, it gives the people a different product. And, of course, I want people to tune in and look at it because they're friends of mine. But it's a different feel. And I think it's entertaining. And they're doing pretty darn well where they're at. So, I mean, what do you say, John, about this? You saw the ad. What did you think?
I like SWE for Fury. I think they're doing a
No,
really good.
I didn't mean to cut you off on that, but I mean the ad for the WrestleMania. What did you think?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking SW Fury because I literally just saw an ad for Terry Funk and Mark Henry going to be on that show. So I was like, oh, they're doing a great job. I like what they're doing. Oh, the WrestleMania ad was horrible. It was so corny. It was so hacky. Them trying to put the little cutesy names on there. Um, I don't know. The only one that I was like okay with is the girl Sasha Banks, which she did because it was kind of just her going through the motion a little bit. So it was okay, but the other stuff with Triple H and Stephanie and John Cena was really bad and really corny. I didn't like it at all. I didn't think it accomplished anything good. It didn't make me want to. Oh wow, WrestleMania! It didn't make me want to go see it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, again, nobody has the answer. I'm saying they're selling the venues. If you were going to a WrestleMania, are you going to buy all three of them right now with the
No,
price tag they cost
nope.
when we're in a semi recession? I mean, I just didn't get. I think whoever came up with that needs to be taken to the carpet and explain themselves. I mean, are we going to see after this weekend the NFL announce Tampa and the next two Super Bowls? Are they going to push all three of them?
Doubt it.
I know they're not. You know they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Because the third one hasn't been even, they bid on it. The city bids on it, so they haven't got a
Yep.
bid for it yet. I mean, what was the point of that? To end up and say we're going to Hollywood? Well, if that's it, maybe just bypass Dallas and go to Hollywood. Stay
Right.
there.
Yeah. Yep. So as far as sold out 98 is concerned, the month before, obviously Starrcade 97, the biggest pay-per-view to that date did about 700,000 buys. So I mean that was huge and phenomenal. But I'm also thinking maybe that kind of hurt because of the finish and everything else. And I know that we're going to talk about it in a few minutes, what you guys kind of came up with to combat that finish. But I wonder if that led to a little bit of a dip that people were pissed about what happened at Starrcade 97.
I'm sure they were. They rightfully had the right to be, don't you think?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
I mean, see what people, even stars in our business, some of them don't understand. There's good heat and bad heat. Good heat makes you pissed off, but you want to come back because you know the babyface got screwed. Bad heat is when you know the company screwed you as a fan. And it amazes me to this day that some very, very high ranking stars sometimes don't know the difference between the two of them.
Yep.
And it's an easy out for them.
Yep. Definitely. For sure. I feel like that to me when I was a fan, I was very disappointed, the way that thing because you figure Sting goes over strong, Sting goes over big, and maybe Hogan gets his revenge next month or something. But that was just like, man, that deflated me as a fan. And I love WCW. I was a WCW fan through and through, but I was like, man, that deflated me just because I literally had to go back and watch the tape and like, did he kick out? Was that a fan? I was so confused.
Yeah,
As a guy, how old? As a 16-year-old fan, I was very, very confused at that point.
yeah.
It was
You
a
could,
it was
if you were
crazy.
confused, you can imagine people that bought it because the names and they saw the finish that weren't like wrestling fans like you were and said, "What the hell happened? I'm not going to just waste my money again." I always equate finishes like that, John. You're watching the Super Bowl, right? We'll say it's going to be Buffalo and Tampa, and Tampa's behind, but they got 2 minutes left to go, and they're marching down the field. Now they're on the 20-yard line, first and goal, 40 seconds left to go. And someone from the Bills off the bench runs in and steals the football. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Is that the way you want a Super Bowl to end? And that's when I always thought about pay-per-views. There are Super Bowls. And if you don't protect them, then nothing is protected.
Yep. Totally agree. It's just one of those things where it's like, man, that was such a disappointment. And it was their highest rated, or your really highest rated pay-per-view of all time. And it was the highest rated wrestling pay-per-view of all time as far as buy rates to get 700,000. It definitely hurt, even though you made so much money off of it, because people were pissed off about how it ended.
Yeah. So we lost half the audience, over half.
Yep. For the next pay-per-view. Yeah.
Yeah, over half. Imagine if we did the right thing.
Yeah. Yep. And even leading into it, now one of the biggest stars in wrestling, you just got him from WWF, Bret Hart, is going to make his pay-per-view debut. He's actually going to be able to wrestle on this show. I know he debuted at Starrcade in a weird kind of referee role, which
Yeah.
we've talked about. If you go back to the archives, you talked about that before. But now it's going to be he's free and clear of a clause, so he's actually able to wrestle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you figure maybe it would get maybe not a bump of 700,000, but maybe get a little bump. But I think people were so turned off by the finish that it kind of ruined his debut wrestling wise.
I think you're right. And I also think what you said, if Sting had gone over and we came back with a rematch, people would have bought it because they say, oh, Hogan's going to get it back. Maybe he won't. Let's see. And oh, Bret Hart's going to be on the show. Oh, cool. I wonder what he's going to get involved or something. You know what I mean? Then you got the NWO. You had a stacked lineup, but you cannot, like I said, they can't go home when they feel like they've been ripped off.
For sure. With Brett, was it a 60-day clause of no wrestling? Because he kind of made his debut basically a month after Survivor Series on Nitro. And, they brought him out of the limo and everything else. And he was on TV for a few weeks, and they made him a referee for Bischoff and Zabisco. And then he became the referee kind of by proxy, or, just kind of made himself the referee of Sting and Hulk Hogan. Was there some sort of contract thing he wasn't able to wrestle?
I'm 80% sure that that's what it was. Or if we had decided to get him wrestling the first time on Sold Out. But I'm pretty sure that he couldn't compete like they usually do, you know what I mean? For 90 days. If I can remember back then, that's what it was.
So
But
it was weird, and I remember reading it. I think it was 60 days. It was like a weird clause he had in his contract that it was 60 days. But now we hear 90 days, 90 days, 90 days. So they may have extended it after this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think after him, they extended it for 90 days.
I guess it kind of protects them, I guess, from them being a hot property and immediately jumping. I know some guys, like I know Raven and Jarrett and stuff, they didn't even have those clauses in their contract and kind of would jumping around.
Well, I don't know how that would stand up in court. Because in the Constitution, you can't deny a man making a living.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to see that challenged.
Knowing WWE, though, they would put you in court forever, and they would just keep coming back and cost you so much money if they screw it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if you give your notice at any other job, can't you start after your notice is done?
Pretty much, unless you sign some sort of contract where you
Yeah.
say like, "Hey, I'm not going to compete for another job for a year or whatever."
Yeah, and aren't you an independent contractor for them?
Oh, good point. Yes.
So if you hire somebody to clean your gutters, John, right? Can you make them piss in the cup?
No.
If you to be an independent contractor, you have to make a third of your money outside of the main company that you work for.
I didn't know that. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I
Oh,
have a friend of mine, two houses down, is the was the president of Money Tree Lending. He's the professor and emerit of literature in Washington, UW, and he was an independent contractor. Their lawyers. He was an independent contractor, but he was president of Money Tree Lending, and their lawyers used to say, if we ever go to court, we're going to get screwed because you'd have to pay his back taxes.
wow. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Crazy. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
But as far as the actual pay-per-view, let's go to some results. The first match, Juventud Guerrera, aka Hoovy Juice, Super Calo, Liz Mark Jr., and Chavo Guerrero Jr. defeats La Parca, Psychosis, Silver King, and El Dandy in about 9 minutes and 30 seconds in an 8-man tag. That's a hell of a luchador lineup there of an 8-man, huh?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we were lucky, and I mentioned this before about Conan. Conan doesn't get his due. Uh, Conan was very instrumental working with me when I brought him in. He was the one that told me about Ray, and then I brought Ray in sight unseen, and then Hoovy, and then the floodgates opened, and I I was able to show the United States in North America the fabulous wrestling out of Mexico, the lucha libre style. And Conan was, he would tell me actually who would go with who. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I booked the finish probably for this match when I said to them, "What are you guys going to do?" That's pretty easy to do, but Conan said these four go together with these four.
Wow, so he was very instrumental even in helping you book the guys as well.
Yeah, like because I bring a guy in and I'd say, "Well, what is he, a babyface or heel?" Just on his recommendation, he said, "Well, he's a great heel, but he has great matches with Ray. Why don't you put him with Ray?" And that's what I would do.
And a buddy of mine used to love, which is so funny because I think all the luchadors are great. They all looked great. They wrestled great. They were such good workers. But a buddy of mine used to love Super Calo, which is just so funny because I feel like that was so random. But even a guy like him was a superior worker to a lot of other wrestlers. Very, very good.
They all were. Silver King, I mean, Gaza. There was that was what the brilliance and great help that Conan was. He knew because he had booked him in Mexico, for AAA.
Basically, the 8-man tag goes down. I think all those guys are great. You were saying even the other luchadors were so great and so
They
professional
were,
outside of just those 8.
yeah, and here's the thing: it's hard to follow Rey Mysterio,
Yep.
but they were maybe just a notch below, but Ray had that intangible thing that you can't say what it is. He had it, and still does.
No doubt about it. That's for sure. The next match up, Chris Benoit defeats Raven in a Ravens rules match by submission. Match goes a little bit over 10 minutes. Was to me a great match. I don't know. I just always liked any match Benoit's in is great. And Raven, I think, was kind of an underrated wrestler as well. And especially if you do a Ravens rules match, put a little extra incentive into it. What do you think about Benoit defeating Raven here?
I mean, that's what it was booked for. And the thing about it is, you hit it on the head. Raven is another guy that didn't get his due. Smart guy came up with that. Smart guy. was smart enough to put a flock around him when that they could get picked off and he could keep the heat. And when there was a match that he had to go, like against Benoit, he could go. He could go. And I used to like that drop toe hold spot he did with the chair. Do you remember that?
Yep. Love that. Yep.
Yeah. He had a lot of innovative things. I've always thought Raven never got his just due. And a very smart guy in life. And, he has a very high IQ, very good chess player. And I think he has a kind of a laid back personality that people almost like a Asperger's type where people don't get him socially. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
And he's a very, very smart guy and I'm sure in all businesses, but in the wrestling business he was very, very smart.
What do you think about Benoit at this point feuding with the Flock? Because I always thought this was excellent, and the crowd would go nuts for any of these altercations.
Yeah, they worked so well together at the time, and uh, Benoit could do all his shit with these guys because they did that kind of stuff. And he could do all kinds of physical things because they were friends. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it just, they all worked well together. And you knew you're going to have the best match of the card with him.
Yes. 100%.
If Eddie or Ray didn't, you know what I mean? You're going to have 3 great matches.
And the funny thing with Raven was like he almost played it off like he liked the submission. You know what I mean? Like the crippler cross face. He almost made it into like he was like demonic or he was nuts. Like he didn't mind getting put in submissions. He would pass out or whatever. But it was funny. It was like he was nuts. There was like an extra added element of craziness.
Yeah, and it was like he was into S&M, and bondage and stuff.
Interesting guy. Interesting cat. The next match up, Chris Jericho defeats Rey Mysterio Jr. by submission to become the WWE Cruiserweight Champion. Great match. I know Mysterio a little bit hobbled with a knee injury at this point, but still a great match, and these two guys are great.
Yeah, what are you going to say? I mean, they're 2 of the all-time greats. And Ray goes out there with a bad leg, and if they didn't steal the show, they came damn close. And I liked that we did when you put Ray in that kind of a match with a young Chris Jericho, you're not expecting a tap out. You're not expecting that. And I think that worked terrific because you thought it was going to be some kind of, flying pancake, double whiz cheeseburger. It was just worked perfectly.
And Jericho was at his heel best at this point, ripping him off, calling him ugly, and a million different things to get the crowd riled up and hating him. But I feel like he was so great at this point and really coming to his own as such a great heel in '98.
I think at this period he was the best he ever was as a heel.
I agree. So good.
Yeah.
The sarcasm, the ripping the fans, like him telling the fans to shut up, which obviously, they're not going to listen to him. They're not going to answer him. But it was just funny. Like, excuse me, I tell you to shut up. Like, like just simple heel tactics, but it really worked. And he was so smarmy and like overly sarcastic that it worked so well with the character. And the fans absolutely hated him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's had a long and storied career, but I think at this period he really broke through and was at maybe in my mind his all-time best.
And then he would say it was Monday Night Jericho, not Monday Night Nitro, stuff like that. It was just really, really good stuff. So classic. Does he work with you on any of that stuff, or is that all him?
He probably runs stuff by me, but I mean, the thing about booking is you need to know the horses you have and the bridles that you don't need to put in anybody's mouth. Jericho, there were guys, I was thinking about this today. When the Texas Outlaws were Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes, I remember when I first broke into the business, when people talked about that team, they said, "Oh, they're a great team, but Dusty can't talk." Can you imagine that?
Crazy.
And that was, and people went along with that. And then once he came to Florida, he took the bridle out of his mouth and look, if there's three great talkers than Dusty Rhodes, tell me who they are.
Yep. True.
And sometimes you just got to know your talent and who has a strong point and who doesn't. You know what I'm saying? And Chris had that from the very beginning.
And look at him now. A
Yeah,
lot of people consider him one of the all-time greats. So look at him now.
right.
So next up, J.J. Dillon comes to the ring with Mean Gene Okerlund, of course, and he's asking for Hulk Hogan to come down. He's asking for Sting to come down. He wants Hot Rod, Rowdy Roddy Piper to come down. Piper, we really hadn't seen much since Halloween Havoc 97, and it's going to be his decision to kind of say what's going to happen with the title, and he's going to kind of be the one that's going to be kind of decide the fate of the quote-unquote vacated WCW title after the debacle at Starrcade 97. How come Piper hadn't been on much since Halloween Havoc when he beat Hogan in the cage?
Roddy had a very strange contract. He had very few dates. And the other thing about him, if you were going to give Roddy a date, you had to give him, it was either 30 or 60 days notice. Because at this time, he was really getting into trying to get movie parts. So he was in LA. I don't know if he, at before Roddy died, he was living in both LA and Portland. And I don't know, I'm sure he had a condo or an apartment there, but he was, he wanted to be a movie star. And he was down there a lot, auditioning for roles.
Oh, okay.
So okay, you book the TVs, and it's 50 days out. You can't get Piper. You know what I mean? So now you're pushing it back, and so that's how it went.
Now, just to set the stage, so Mean Gene's out there. He brings out J.J. Dillon. J.J. Dillon brings out Piper. Then Piper calls out Sting, Hollywood Hogan, and even Scott Hall because Hall had just won World War III. So his kind of number one contendership, so to speak, is kind of up in the air because maybe he could be the champion because he's the number one contender. So that's just kind of floated out there. Was that just something just to kind of make it just more intriguing and more interesting? Like, oh, what about Hall? He won World War III.
Right, because we did say that he'd have a championship shot, right? He was becoming the number one contender. And, I'm a firm believer, if you put something out there, you better have a reason not to do it. And it better make sense.
Yep. For sure. So basically, it's announced even though Hall earned the shot at World War III, he would not be getting the championship match at Super Bowl as a result of winning it, but it would be postponed to a later date. And Piper announces the Super Bowl main event would be a rematch of Starrcade for the vacated title between Hollywood Hogan and Sting. Obviously, the big rematch, the gigantic rematch, the monumental rematch that just did 700,000 buys. It is now going to be put on to Super Bowl. So basically, Hogan at this point urges Scott Hall to beat up Sting, but instead, Scott Hall just walks away. And Hogan's a little bit disgusted, but Hall is disgusted that he's not going to be getting his title shot. So it's just teasing a little dissension with Hogan and Hall as well.
Yes. And the reason for that, in my head, it makes the belt mean something. If you're maybe in Hogan's camp, but your whole thing is everybody wants to be the world heavyweight champion. If you get it taken away from you, a shot, you're going to be pissed. And I think it helps the belt. People go, "Oh, I didn't see that one coming. I thought they were friends." And it just adds a different little layer, John.
Yep. Yep, for sure. I think that also, just an interesting thing is here. Was this ever the plan to vacate the title, or was Sting supposed to go over strong and then continue to be champion and have a nice run? What was the plan? Like, how come the vacated title comes up?
How come?
Yeah.
Because even though there was really no social media, to speak of like there is today, we were getting hammered, and rightfully so. You can't. Well, it shows. We dropped. What did we lose? 300 and almost 400,000 people, almost 400,000 buys. And let's put that as people, John. We'll say the average had 4 people in the house, right? Watching the
Yep.
TV. You don't watch it alone, especially when you're 60 years old. You have your buddies there, right?
Yep.
So we're talking we're losing 1.6 million people. Pretty big hole.
So you kind of had to make up for it.
We're in the Titanic and we're getting in. Whoa, it's getting a little cold here, John. Brr. I don't put your hand in the water. Oh, don't worry about it, Kev. We'll be in warmer waters in the morning. Okay. Just
So who?
full steam ahead, John.
So who came up with the vacated title storyline?
I'll tell you what. I'd like to take credit for a lot of things, but this one was when this had happened. JJ was always the rock of reasoning. He came to me and said, "You can't let this thing go." And we kicked it around, and he was really. And I'll tell you what, Hall and Nash would throw their 2 cents in too, whether it was this was not going to be good for them. You know what I mean? Always going to lose the title shot. They threw it in. Everybody knew it was wrong, and everybody had fingers pointing at each other. And doesn't matter. You got to make it right. And JJ was the one that said, "Hey, maybe we vacated that we, without saying we're sorry we screwed you people that bought this. We're saying it, isn't it? Basically,
100%.
yeah."
Yep.
And JJ was a very smart guy. He was a school professor, immaculate handwriting, kept ledgers. I mean, he kept, if you ever read his book, he had every town he ever went to, every payoff, every mile, if he stayed over or not. He kept things. He was a scholar, and he kept things in perspective to make shit right. And he was invaluable to me.
He definitely was great, and I feel like maybe he didn't like his time in WCW as much, or didn't like his role, but he was important for sure for WCW. But the thing is, with the vacated title, those guys are not wrestling on the show, so there's no Sting on Sold Out. There's no Hogan wrestling. There's no Piper wrestling. Is that one of those things? It's like almost like a spoil of riches, or however that expression goes. It's like almost too much talent. You had all those guys not, and you still had main event wrestlers on the show. I mean, you still had Brett, Flair, Luger, Savage. So is that one of those things that you guys almost had too much star power? If that's even a possible of a thing?
I think it is a possible thing, John. But they weren't wrestling, and I'll tell you why. We only had Hogan as you know, X amount of days to wrestle, Sting X amount of days, and Piper X amount of days. They could come in and do an interview, and it didn't count against the days.
So it could help the show per se, but it just won't. They won't be able to wrestle because of the contract. Okay,
Right.
makes sense. The next match up, Booker T defeats Rick Martel for, retaining the WCW Cruiserweight Championship in about 11 minutes. Man, I got to be honest. This is a great match. These two always had great matches. Martel in 98, what a career resurgence. I was shocked that you guys brought him in. Do you know why or who brought him in? Is this the
I
Bischoff thing?
did. I
Oh,
did.
you did. Okay.
I met Rick in Calgary in 1974 or 75, when he was 18 years old. And I knew he was a star. I brought him to, I left, I spent 5 or 6 weeks there. Drove across. It was Christmas time. I was going to go back to Boston. I drove across Canada and I wrestled Ricky in Montreal. The next night I was in Boston. I said, "You'll hear from me in a couple of days." And I know he thought, "Oh yeah, I've heard this before." 2 days later, he was booked to go to Florida. And then a lot of people don't know this. Rick drew a lot of money in New Zealand and Australia in a real, I don't know if you could do it today. The angle he had, he was Mark Lewin's bastard son.
Whoa. Interesting.
Hey, yeah, and think about this. This is Australia and New Zealand. You know what I mean? And what I'm saying that is, shit happens down there. You know what I mean? There's a lot of open spaces. So they drew big all through that part. And Rick became an owner in Hawaii. Then later on, he became an owner in when Gino Brito and Andre started that company in Montreal in the mid 80s. That's how he got to WWE when WWE bought them out. One of the
Just
greatest performers I've ever seen. One of the great baby faces I've ever seen. Very much like Barry Windham.
Yes. Just one of those things where I was, like, shocked to see this return because it was kinda out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he's kind of embroidered in a little bit of a feud with Booker T, or, the constant thing was he wants a shot at the TV title. He's kind of that was, like, his thing. He wanted, that title shot, but I don't know, I loved it. He was in great shape. He
Yeah.
still could work. He, obviously really still a great worker. I was just shocked to see it, but it's cool to see that you were the one that brought him back in.
Yeah, and he became a multimillionaire buying property. He's a super, super successful guy. And one
Yeah.
of the nicest guys I have met in my life.
Yeah, he's up there in, Canada and doesn't
Quebec
need to do
City.
anything. Yeah, doesn't need to do anything wrestling again.
No, no, he's great.
So I just and him and Booker T, obviously Booker T is great, but you just
Yeah,
put them together. It was almost like a Benoit thing. Like, okay, throw these guys out there, it's going to be a good match automatically.
right, right.
The next matchup, Larry Zbyszko, the living legend, with Dusty Rhodes, defeats Scott Hall, who was with Louis Spicolli, by disqualification in 8 minutes. The key to this is Dusty Rhodes turns heel and joins the NWO. And a little tidbit of thing here. We had Dusty's last ever interview for the two-man power trip. It's only a few days before he had passed. And we jokingly said, as we were like hanging up with him, we're like, oh, and that epic heel turn when you turned on Larry Zbyszko. And he jokingly said, he goes, "That wasn't epic. I just wanted to lay one in on Zbyszko."
Yeah, and the thing was, kudos to Scott Hall. He was a Dusty Rhodes fan when he was a fan. Dusty broke him in the business. He knew how smart Dusty was. When you're an intelligent guy, it doesn't run out. You know what I mean? He may get not in the shape that he was in to wrestle, but Dusty was a brilliant guy. Put on the sidelines, and Scott knew that was wrong, and that was all Scott's idea. Bring him Dusty back. He had the power to bring him back, and he did, and rightfully so. He repaid a favor. A lot of guys don't forget the guys that got him there. And
The thing
Scott,
is,
go
yeah,
ahead.
the thing is, like, Scott Hall loves Dusty. I talked to Scott about it. He was almost in tears talking about how Dusty gave him his first pair of boots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember them coming in the office, him and Danny Spivey. I remember Scott coming to the gym I used to train at, asking me how to get in the business. I would give him the runaround. And I remember him and Danny Spivey coming into the office, and my office was next to Dusty's, and Dusty said, "I want you to meet the new American Eagle tag team or American Starship or something." And that was it. Scott and Danny never looked back.
Very cool. The thing is, with this, it sold out with Rhodes. When the crowd sees Dusty, they beating up Louis Piccoli, and like you think he's going to be pro WCW. He got a huge pop. I mean, they still loved him in '98.
They loved Dusty. I mean, Dusty just John, I'll tell you the strangest thing in the world, okay? Now, we know the physical shape Dusty was in. When I had my run with Dusty, I had a 3-year run that at least 5 out of the 7 days it was me against Dusty, or me and Mark against Dusty and Barry, Dusty and Blackjack, or maybe 1 day or 2 days Dusty would go to St. Louis or Houston or someplace else, the Gardens or someplace else. But we worked minimum 5 days a week for 3 years. During that period, there's starting to be a switch, because if you're heel and you're over, there starts to be a trickle down. Even back in those days, there starts to be a trickle down where some fans younger fans like you were, start cheering the heels. I never heard ever anybody ever say, "Dusty, you're fat." Ever. Ever. And at the time I was into bodybuilding, powerlifting, and you had Mark, who looked like King Kong. Never. That's how over Dusty was. Nobody saw any fault in Dusty because he was so magnetic. I mean, I thought about him the other day. I wish I had read his book way before he passed. And he said some things about me. I couldn't believe how he put me over. I thought, wow. Because Dusty could get snug in the ring and get pissed at you. And I was thinking, wow, that was very nice of him. But Dusty, when he entered the room, I don't care if you had Raquel Welch and Jennifer Lopez, and name all the good-looking girls, and Tom Brady, and I'm going Big Papi, and Conor McGregor. When Dusty walked in the room, the whole room turned to look at Dusty. He was magnetic. He was like Marlon Brando. He was a magnet, and he deserved to do that. And I was never so happy for him when Scott. I mean, he didn't have to do that. I mean, Scott got some resistance. But he fortitude on and got Dusty there, and rightfully so. And Scott didn't forget who got him to the dance.
And the funny part is the crowd, when he turns heel, the crowd is pissed. I mean, they are upset big time. And I think the most upset person in the arena that night was Tony Schiavone, because he won't even speak for a few minutes, which was great and totally added to it. Like, the heel turn, that, wow, the announcer won't even speak because he's so upset.
Yeah. Tony doesn't give his. I've been saying this all night, but it's true. Tony doesn't get the credit he deserves. He's starting to get it now.
Yep, finally. Yep.
Yeah, finally. It took him forever, but I mean, Tony is a very good announcer.
Hey, I always put him right up there neck and neck with JR. I think Tony's awesome. I always liked Tony.
I do too. I mean, I did a couple of shows with Tony back in the day, and it was an easy thing to play off of. He was easy to play off, and lob me softballs for hit him out of the park. He's very good and got a great personality.
Absolutely. The next matchup, Ray Traylor and the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott, with Ted DiBiase, defeat Conan, Scott Norton, and Buff Bagwell with Vincent. But a 12-minute match in this six-man tag just to get WCW win over the NWO, keep the Steiner brothers strong.
Yeah. And, you know, yeah, that's basically what it was, just to keep the Snyder Brothers on the card because people paid to see the Snyder Brothers.
Interesting. Do you like them with DiBiase, or you think that's like a little bit? I don't know, because he a little bit of a Christian, born again at this point. He wasn't NWO anymore. He goes face. I don't know if he kind of meshes well with the Steiner brothers.
I wasn't, I'm not a big fan of babyface managers or workers, you know. Teddy had been the, manager as a heel. Just didn't fit well with me, but you got, you got guys on payroll that you have to put them in some way. Teddy was a
Yeah.
great performer in his day, but it's just trying to put in. Sometimes you have to do it, putting a round peg in a square hole.
Yes. The next matchup, Kevin Nash with Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff defeat the Giant in about 10 minutes. I think the most interesting part of this match is Nash tries to get the 450-pound Giant up for a powerbomb, which he did at Super Bowl 97, nice and clean. But Giant is bigger here. I would say Giant's about 50 pounds heavier at this point than he was at that point. Gets him up, drops him directly on his head and neck area. What did you think? Were you scared as hell at this point?
I shit my pants. Go back. You've looked at it 1,000 times, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you looked at it lately, right?
Yep.
His chin is touching his sternum. You know, I broke my neck. I mean, so it just horrified me. You know, I'm sure there are vertebrae like mine that have been snapped, pieces off floating around in the Giant's neck. I mean, Kevin's, hey, I was a power lifter and I was fairly good at it. Kevin's one of the strongest men I've ever seen. I trained with Kevin numerous times, and Kevin, the lat pull down that's made of the Nautilus, where you reach your hand out in front of you on one side. Kevin
Yep.
would do over 700 pounds with that.
Whoa.
Whoa is right. Whoa.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin's was super strong, back, shoulders, arms, and he had taken the Giant up, like you said, on the original one and really got him up like nothing. But 50 pounds make a lot of difference, and probably energy expended before him doing it, or maybe the Giant slightly weight shifted or something. But boy, we were lucky nothing bad happened.
Ooh, scary as hell. And the thing was, Nash guaranteed to be at this show because he did not make Starrcade, which was the original Giant versus Nash match where it was supposed to happen. And the Giant has that great line, all you got to do is show up, kind of teasing the fact that Nash, why did he miss Starrcade? Was it really an injury?
I'm going to take Kevin for his word. He supposedly had some chest pains and didn't want to get on a plane because he had some serious chest pains. I don't think Kevin would miss a pay-per-view. They were rolling, you know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean, sometimes we all, we all have heard so much bullshit that we start to think everything's bullshit. As I said before, sometimes Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes you miss it because of health reason, or you miss the plane or something. And Kevin wasn't going to miss. Hey, he was making a shit ton of money, right? He was making more than anybody in the WWF at the time. He wasn't going to jeopardize that deal. And Kevin was a team player. He would have made a pay-per-view. I think he even got some bonuses if the pay-per-views hit a certain number that he was on. So he wasn't going to cut his own paycheck.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, that's another thing haunted Starrcade '97, the big Nash Giant match that they were, Giant versus
Yeah,
Giant, Giant versus Giant Killer, the whole thing that they were promoting. You didn't get that, but at least you get it here at Sold Out. Just unfortunate, the crazy injury. I mean, it's bad enough to drop a guy in the head, but a 500-pound guy or 450-pound guy whose body is gonna go like that, oof,
yeah,
scary as hell.
yeah. And you brought it up, John. The angle, right? Because when Kevin got him the first time, it was smooth, right?
Very, yep.
Kevin's starting to get him smooth. It's like the Giant put out his feet, which were, his legs parallel, which were like, probably 200 pounds apiece, and started to bring him down. And Kevin tried to muscle him up and did as good as he could. If Kevin had dropped him earlier, he might have really busted his neck and his face all up.
Yeah, it's weird. I know me personally, like when you actually take that move, you give a little bit of a spring, but don't stiffen because
Right.
that'll make the guy go down. And that's exactly. I mean, obviously he weighs 450 pounds, but he stiffened a little and then got literally jackknifed for
Yeah.
real.
And you couldn't explain it any better, John. You can't stiffen on that. You have to go. And
Yep.
he did. His legs, like I said, went out like it'd be like if you got in a rocket and all of a sudden two wings came out. It's going to slow you down, and that's what happened.
Yep.
And
It's just
we got to take into consideration the Giant is still very young here, and nobody else was picking him up like that.
yeah. Yep. Yep. That's for sure. Then the next match, Bret Hart defeats Ric Flair by submission in about 18 minutes. Me, myself, there's so many great matches on this card, and I like the show overall, but this is my favorite match on the show. I thought this was really well done. This was better than their WWF matches. Really, really good match. Almost great. What do you think about Bret Hart defeating Ric Flair here?
Well, I'm going to ask you a question because I never heard that before, and I agree with you. Why do you think it was so much better than the WWE matches?
I don't know, to be honest. I've heard that Brett say that Rick kind of lost his psychology in some of the matches, and he did something else, and he wasn't really following along with what they had planned for the match, and it kind of went awry. And if you do watch the matches in WWF, they're good, but they could have been better. But it's weird. It looks like it's going in one direction, and Rick does something else. I don't know, there's something a little askew in that. I just felt that in WCW, Brett and Flair were both giving it the role. Brett needed to prove he still got it. Rick wanted to prove he's the best, and I think that I don't know, the match delivered for me. I thought it was an awesome match.
It delivers for me too, and that's why I asked you. It could have been too that Rick was trying to do WCW in WWF, and then when Brett came in, Brett did WCW. You know what I mean? There was
The
obviously
style.
communication, and hey, they're still two of the greatest workers of all times, but there was obviously something different, and I think it was Rick being Rick and Brett playing to the WWF fans. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there was something, a little miscommunication, a little
Yeah.
something askew in WWF. WCW, the match was so much better. Same thing with Flair and Hogan, was much better in WCW than the match in WWF, even though the match in WWF weren't bad. So just interesting the way it works out sometimes.
And I think that's because Hogan, people can tell me that Hogan can't work. Go watch him when he was with Inoki. He was a fabulous heel. And what I'm telling you, watch what the difference that Hogan was in WWF in the different work he was in WCW. They both, people think, oh, that's wrestling. They both had different styles. And Hogan adapted to it too in WCW with Flair. He knew he had to wrestle WCW style in WCW for Flair. Does that make sense to you, John?
Yes. Yep. Yep. How come Bret Hart versus Ric Flair was not the main event of the show? That was a surprise.
Uh, I think originally wasn't it billed as a double main event?
Yes. The billing does say double main event, Luger versus Savage, Flair versus Bret, but I'm just curious how come this one doesn't go on last?
Uh, because you know when told you about knowing your horses.
Yes.
Well, I got Rick, who has been there so many times, and he understood politics. And then I got Randy, who can get paranoid of if you go by him and say, "How you doing, Randy?" What do you mean by that? So sometimes you have to go to people and explain yourself and say, "Hey, to make this run a lot smoother, and we're at a pay-per-view. We don't need to be having a uh, council meeting on why somebody's going on last on a double main event." And Randy and I were very close, but Randy, as you probably well know, could get really paranoid about anything. And I appreciated Randy for the talent he was, and I appreciated for friend he was. That I don't want to make this guy any more uptight than he needs to be, especially on this pay-per-view that we screwed the people the last time. I need this to go off, hopefully without many hitches. Does that make sense?
Yep. Makes perfect sense to me. And the thing is, was it in Savage's contract at all that he had to be the main event? Was that
No,
ever?
no,
No.
no, no, no. But there's times you can see the path of, I don't believe in the path of least resistance, but if it's not going to make any difference. And the other thing that it turned out to be, I was very lucky. Maybe because Flair and Hart were on, that made their match was so good. It made Randy work. Not that he never worked hard, but made Luger and Randy work harder. And maybe Rick and Brett wouldn't have gotten the excitement that they did in their match if Randy and Luger went on before them. It maybe had taken something off. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've always thought, and Mark Lewin taught me this. He said, always follow the hottest match. He said, because the people are up. He said, don't try to follow a match that the people are kind of milk toast and go in the bathroom about and going to the concession stands. So,
Right.
yeah.
Makes sense. So then the main event, Lex Luger defeats the Macho Man Randy Savage with Miss Elizabeth by submission in a singles match, obviously just about 7 minutes. The thing about that is that's kind of a long-running feud between Luger and Savage. Savage kind of interfered in the Starrcade 97 match, causing Buff to beat Luger, kind of keeping the feud going and obviously enticing that. An interesting thing there is that that's just a part of the build. He's going to tease that. Then the next month they feud. So then Hogan and the NWO, but minus Scott Hall, come out all to attack Luger, which then brings out Sting, who cleans house with Luger, setting up the main event for Super Bowl '98 the following month, which is for the vacated WCW World Title, Sting versus Hollywood Hogan. So that kind of makes it make sense too. You're going to go off the air with your biggest guys, Sting and Hogan, and really Sting and Luger beating up the NWO, setting up the match, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully drawing a line to the next pay-per-view.
Yes. So
Yeah.
overall, though, what is kind of your thoughts on Sold Out 98 overall? To me, I liked it. Great show, and Bret Hart versus Flair stood out to me as the best match.
Yeah. Bret Hart and Benoit and Ray, and there was some good matches, and it kind of saved. We couldn't have had two screwy matches, two screwy pay-per-views in a row, or we were dead. So it really kind of saved the day, I think.
Yes, for sure. Not only the 380 bucks, but it was definitely a better show a lot better show than Starcade 97 was. That is for sure. Now, as we get into the plugs, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. You can follow Kevin at Taskmaster Talks on Instagram. Check out my website, tmptempire.com. You can go to prowrestlingtees.com and go to the Kevin Sullivan store. Get a couple great shirts over there. Also, go to the doublehell.com, their wrestling store. They have a array of great shirts, including this awesome one that I'm wearing right now, which I absolutely love. Thank you guys for the shirt. Thank you, Kevin, for the shirt. Awesome stuff. So that is doublehell.com. Kevin, what else you got going on?
Well, I'll be in Dallas for SWE Fury on the 7th, and then on the 27th, I'll be with them again. And some of the people that are going to be on the show, Terry Funk's making a return on the 27th. Mark Henry will be there the 7th and the 27th. Teddy Long, of course, Andrew Anderson. Actually, Roddy Piper's daughter's coming to the show on the 7th, along with Eddie Guerrero's daughter, along with Terry Gordy's daughter. So we have a lot of second generation ladies coming to the show to perform. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all my friends there.
Awesome. Great stuff, man. The Fury is SW Fury's kicking butt and taking names and having a lot of big, cool stars on the show. But definitely
Yeah.
looking forward to that.
And they get the Blood Hunter, who I hear is going to be on the show on the 7th and on the 27th. His nemesis, Davy Boy Smith Jr. is going to be there, and I think that we may see them tie up. So that'd be good.
Wow. Two behemoths, two big
Yeah.
boys right there, both
Yeah.
about 6'5". Wow.
Right.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Kevin, great as always this week. Like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.